What's going on, everyone? On this episode of The Outdoorsman, we are talking about my favorite deer calls and why. So stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy. Alright, so before we get started in this episode, I want to clarify something that is said or asked in every single one of our product videos that we've done on YouTube, and that is basically whether or not we're sponsored by them, we have a paid endorsement, we have some sort of contract. There's no ties with any companies or anything like that in this video. I have no call sponsorships. The Outdoorsman has no call sponsorships. So the calls that I've selected that are my favorite are basically based off of experience over the past 12 years of my life of carrying deer calls out in the woods with me. And the reason I've selected them basically is because it was what was available when I was looking for new calls at the time. I'm sure there's other brands out there. I know there's a lot of custom calls companies out there that make calls that are very similar that you could probably check out. So just want to clarify that before we get into this episode. So obviously there is a mess of calls on this table. Over the years since I first started really deer hunting, obviously I went out hunting with my dad a couple times when I was like 5 and 6 years old, but I really didn't start carrying a firearm and actually trying to harvest something myself until I was about 7 or 8. Ever since that time, I've literally been obsessed with the outdoors, and obviously you can tell this because over the years I just kept collecting calls. Unlike most kids where they went out and collected action figures and toys, which I did a little bit of, majority of my money was spent on the outdoors, as you can see, and over the years of just trying calls and getting a feel for calls and doing my studying based off of whitetail vocalizations, what whitetails like, and just field experience. I finally narrowed it down to my 2 favorite types of calls that I literally will carry in the woods from October 1st all the way to the 2nd or 3rd week of November. And they're actually not on this table, but you know, some of the calls that I have tried, obviously I've tried the Battle Bones by Flextone. I've got the Black Rack here. I've got some calls by Night and Hail. I've got the old school Primos Bleat that they've actually redone and still continue to sell these days. There was a portion of my hunting career that I was obsessed with the Mad series of calls. I've probably got every single one of the ones that they created just because I was a huge fan of the Drury Brothers. I think those guys are one of the greats in the outdoor industry, without a doubt. They've got a lot of experience. They've been doing the hunting gig for a long time. They've been filming for a long time, and they're definitely a couple of the grandfathers in the outdoor industry. But there was a few things that I didn't end up liking about these calls, so I ended up looking for a different call. And like I said, I finally narrowed it down and found the 2 calls that I'm absolutely obsessed with and will carry throughout deer season. So it's none of those calls. These are it. 2 simple calls, hard set of antlers, and then a grunt tube. Now, the reason I've selected actual antlers, which a lot of guys have their opinions about. I think every hunter is entitled to his opinion, but I think the regular set of hard antlers is the best thing to carry as far as getting into calling with a rattling sequence. Like I said, as you saw from the calls I had previously on the table, I've tried the Black Rack, I've tried Battle Bones, I've tried the Pack Racks. I used to have a couple of the little wood chip packs where they're kind of like in a mesh bag and you used to bang those together. Nothing sounds as good as a real set of antlers, in my opinion. And it also, too, goes into the size of those antlers. There's a lot of guys that you see hunting on television that carry these giant, bulky antlers because they're out there to hunt the biggest and baddest deer in the woods and da-da-da-da-da. Good for you. Most of your average hunters are hunting 3-4-year-old bucks that are basically anywhere from like 100 inches all the way to like high 130s. In my opinion, the size for that is basically 80 to 120 inch set of antlers. And I've literally carried these for now, I think, 5 or 6 seasons. So I narrowed down that I really liked actual antlers a long time ago, but it took me a while to get into what kind of grunt call that I liked. But as far as the reason I like these, like I said, I don't think anything sounds as good as a set of real antlers. In my experience over the past 10 years of doing this with, calls, I really truthfully don't think my success rate has ever been as high as to when I've carried the real antlers. And there were several years, like I said, where I've carried other different styles of rattles, but nothing has drawn more bucks in for me and given me more success out in the field than a real set of antlers. So then getting into my next call is just your simple grunt tube. Now, a lot goes into the selection of this because there's so many different styles of grunt tubes out there. There's even some that I've never even bought, which were those calls where you can have that sliding mechanism on the chamber of your call to where you can kind of adjust your reed on the fly and do different calls. But in my opinion, I think the only and the most effective call out in the woods is just a simple grunt. And with this call, I do have the capability to actually slide and do bleats and things like that. But when I've heard bleats and I've filmed bleats, a lot of the times it's coming from a younger, yearling or year-and-a-half-old deer. And I have never heard an actual doe do that sound. So I've called in bucks before using a bleat, but they've always been younger bucks. I've never called in a mature buck bleating. That could be different for other hunters. That's why I said this is all about my opinion and my experience. So I generally never use a bleat. I just take a simple grunt tube out there. Now, breaking down this call, the importance of this call as compared to the others. Your chamber right here is a lot different than most. A lot of the calls that you see in your retailers like Field & Stream, Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, majority of them are plastic. Very seldom can you go into a retailer like that and find a wood chamber. The wood, in my opinion, sounds the absolute best. Sometimes it's a little more faint. It's not as loud as some of your other calls, but bucks, when they're grunting, very seldom actually do a buck roar. And truthfully, I don't ever want to overcall and be too aggressive, so I never actually do a buck roar. Like I said, sometimes the wood, it's a little more faint, but I think that's more realistic than what you would get out of the plastic chambers. Because, like I said, there's those calls that have those sliding capabilities, but they're generally all plastic. I don't think there's a wood one out there that can do that. That plastic chamber just... it's high pitched, it's a little more loud. I like it a little more faint, a little more quiet, because when I've filmed grunts, when I've heard grunts, it's very faint, very, very faint. And the mic systems have done a good job of picking this up, because a lot of times I've actually filmed it, not even heard it, and then gone home and watched the audio and then turned up my audio. I'm like, whoa, that buck was grunting, but it was so quiet. So that wood chamber gives you that capability. And like I said, as it comes out through that chamber, as it rolls off that reed, I think the wood chamber makes it sound a lot better. And then getting into the back portion of this call, there's several different styles of tubes. As you compare it to, like, we'll get into one of the older mad calls. You've got rubber right here and you've got rubber right here. But as you can see, looking at these two calls, this one is a lot more flimsy. I think that is another very important feature on the grunt call that it's a must. It has to be flimsy, because when I'm sitting in a tree and I want to throw a grunt kind of behind me, or kind of vocalize it as that deer maybe is shifting his head and trying to make it sound more realistic, that rubber portion right there being flimsy gives me that capability. And I can also close up that tube just like a whitetail's mouth, just like his throat. This does a better job of imitating that call, I think, than the hard rubber portions or a solid plastic call. I like to be able to throw that around a little bit and just really get into that call. So, and the other thing, like I said, when we get into it, changing calls, there's bands in here that I can do that, but I haven't changed the setting on this call over the past 2 years that I've been hunting with this, and my success rate has been great. I don't know if you guys have seen any of the episodes from previous seasons. A couple years ago, I killed a buck called Bull with Tyler filming. I killed that on October 25th, and I actually rattled and grunted that buck in. He came in down his scrape line, hit a scrape, and came in posturing into that food plot, or the feed plot, and wasn't even worried about the food. He was looking for the fight. And I without a doubt think it had to do with my calls and with the calling sequence that I did. And the following season, I actually killed another buck that was kind of in that same score class. His name was Dagger, and that was last season. I was self-filming, rattled right before I got out of the stand, and I was actually packing up to leave. And about 15 minutes after I did my last calling sequence, here he comes up the hill, right underneath the base of my tree stand, and was actually posturing, puffed out, ears back. This knowledge, in my opinion, is based off of experience. I've been doing this for a long time. My passions have literally revolved around the outdoors for the past 12, 13 years. And the day that I learned and heard my first vocalization from a whitetail was the day that I'm like, man, I got to learn how to do this, and I got to get good at it, and I want to learn what makes that call special, and if I can imitate that in the best way possible to where I can increase my success rate when it comes to hunting. Now, the calls that I'm talking about in this video, I'll say the brand that I use, this is a Woodhaven classic deer grunt. This call retailed, I think, for about $90 when I bought it. Obviously, that's pretty crazy to spend on a deer call, but this is my obsession, this is my passion, so it was definitely worth every penny, because I've called in more deer with this than I had any other call, and without a doubt, this is my #1 go-to. But like I said, there's probably custom calls out there that mimic this. You can probably get a custom call that's got a wood chamber, but I think this back portion of the tubing is very important too. So you can probably swap that out on any one of your calls, but those are the two key features to why I love this grunt call, and why, in my opinion, I think is a must for you when you go out to the woods when it gets into selecting a grunt call. And then again, the antlers, nothing sounds as real as a set of hard antlers. If you guys haven't seen any of the hunts from the previous seasons, if you guys want to see these calls in action and see these bucks that I've killed through calling sequences, be sure to check out the links in the description below, because I'll link those 2 videos. And then, as always, check out the links to our social media pages that are in the description below. If you guys like this quick video, give it a thumbs up, and then I will see you guys later on the next episode of The Outdoorsman.